This is Never Close the Inquiry with Nick Hagan. Welcome to Never Close the Inquiry, where I aim to demystify the right for the left and the left for the right, where if you come as a conservative, I want you to leave knowing a little bit more about liberals. And if you come as a liberal, I want you to leave knowing a little bit more about conservatives, with the whole idea that over time we'll create better conversations, better relationships, better arguments, and maybe 80 or 90 more steps down the road, a better country. Okay, here we are. Here with Professor Casey Burgat. I should
Burgat, you nailed it.
Burgat. Okay.
Yeah.
With Professor Casey Burgat of George Washington University, Professor of Political Science at George Washington University, and you have written or edited. We can talk about that. We hold these truths: how to spot the myths that are holding America back. So let's start with the book. So it is a compendium of essays from various, political insiders, pushing back on different beliefs that are probably widely held by, I think, a lot of Americans. How'd this start out? How'd you go from not having a book to having a book?
Yeah, a long couple years of banging my head against the wall. It mostly stemmed from exactly as you said, like these widespread beliefs that I know I'm in the bubble, I'm in DC, I teach politics, like these things are just kind of second nature to me, but I got tired of having the same exact conversations over and over and over with folks once they learned I was in politics, where they would say something of, why don't they just do X or why don't they just do Y? And in their head, it's so simple. And if they just accomplish those things, then all of a sudden it'd be kumbaya all the time.
Yeah.
And so just always having those same conversations with well-intentioned folks and even smart and accomplished people of just like, man, it don't work like that. It doesn't work like that. And there's a reason why these things continue on. And oftentimes we're the reason why these myths continue to be present in our politics that are just ultimately holding us back from a lot of the things that we all want to do, even if we disagree on actual policy fronts. So got together with a bunch of people I know and trust who live these jobs. That was on purpose because I faced a fork in the road moment of like, yeah, I could write this myself. And then it would just be kind of cast away as another liberal professor indoctrinating people, preaching to the choir. And I didn't want it to be like that because these myths are not partisan on their surface. And I wanted to be able to reach and kind of discount that immediate pushback that we would get from folks who are just saying, yeah, this is again, a professor that is just, trying to indoctrinate people who already agree with him. And so I don't need to be.
Yeah. So, okay, that's interesting. So let's take a step back. So you're from Colorado.
Yep.
Okay. So how do you get from Colorado and now you're a professor in DC? How do you trod that path? What happened to get you from Colorado to DC in the first place? Why are you still there?
Yeah, good question. And the why are we still here part, good time to ask this question as I look outside at 75. No, I was always in and around politics back in Colorado, political science undergrad. Always just fascinated with the history and the process of where things happen. And I mean, if you like finance, you go to New York. If you like federal government, you go to DC. There are just funnels for this. And I found myself within that funnel. And so the impetus of actually finally moving out here after undergrad and even a master's degree, kind of floating around some campaign work that is just exhausting and cyclical. Can't build a real life around that unless you hitch your wagons to an Obama or even a Trump-like figure that you just all of a sudden end up in those places. Finally came out to the University of Maryland right outside DC to get a PhD. And as I went through those courses and writing a dissertation, got lucky enough to be hired for a job I absolutely wasn't qualified to do at the Congressional Research Service, and got hooked on with some incredible mentors there that just had literally decades and decades of experience for no reason at all, took me under their wing and kind of carved out a niche of federal politics and reform type efforts from some of the smartest people in the land. And after CRS and the Congressional Research Service, got bounced around to some think tanks around DC working on that same issue area. Again, just building more and more reps on a very particular issue set. And then GW came calling saying, hey, we're trying to revitalize a program here of people who you say we need. the next generation of leaders who know this type of process and procedure and organization, come
Mhm.
revamp it. And it became too good to turn down.
That's awesome.
Lucky.
That's
It's
yeah.
lucky.
A lot of, a lot of life is, I mean, it's, you gotta be good and you gotta be lucky. If you're gonna be one or the other, probably, probably a little better to be
Choose
lucky, but
lucky. Yep.
yeah, yeah. But,
Yep.
ideally be both, and it seems like you are both. So okay. Oh man, there's a lot. Okay. So, Congressional Research Service.
Hmm.
Okay. And you're thinking about a lot of these issues, where you're looking at substantive reform to American politics. You're looking at, maybe changes that you'd make at the federal or state level in the laws, in the systems that would lead to better outcomes. Is that a fair way to
Yeah,
phrase it?
and
Okay.
some of them, most of them probably aren't even laws. Like you think about
Okay.
campaign finance, you need an amendment now or a new
Yeah,
Supreme
sure.
Court ruling or a new law. A lot of these are just intra-institutional. So like to make Congress work better, there's a ton you can do by just the members themselves taking a vote about how they organize or what the rules are or how to do these things that you never need the president to sign or you never need a court case to do it. There's a lot you can do just institutionally, and that's kind of where I built up a little portfolio.
Okay. It really interesting. So this book, if you look at it, so we'll run through a number of the chapters. Obviously there, some of the myths that people are pushing back on are, the idea that lobbyists are evil, the idea that bipartisanship is dead, the idea that I, I'm going to forget the name. Well, but the idea that the Constitution isn't just divinely inspired or whatever, but it should kind of be left in place and not touched. You people, I think,
Yep.
don't engage with the idea that it should be amended nearly as much as
Yep.
they should.
Yep.
Um, but a lot of the fixes in the book are not systemic so much as individual. It's
Yep.
like, if you care about bipartisanship, you should vote for candidates that are willing to act in a bipartisan manner. And that sort of change, although on an individual level, it's appealing and adoptable. I think it can be hard. Like one criticism would be that even if you do something, if you really need like 150 million people to do it, then you doing it is really not doing very much.
Yeah. I mean, this is the fundamental complaint you get from my vote doesn't matter in a presidential election.
Yeah.
My vote won't make a difference even if I throw away my vote to vote for a bipartisan person. That doesn't mean everyone else will, but that's the nature of politics. I mean, to do anything you want, you need friends, and more is always better. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I think a lot of folks will find this part, including my publisher in the early stages, by the way. A lot of these folks are like, but tell me the real answer, right? Like, give me
Right.
the
Yeah.
pill that we need. Give me the final silver bullet. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you're missing the point here. Like, this is so. To your credit, it's a good read, and that each individual chapter has its own individual solutions. Because I say all the time to
Hmm.
students and anyone who will listen is like, solve the problem you're trying to solve. Don't try to
Mm.
solve all of them at once. Because if you could, it would have been done by now, right? Like
Right.
these are incredibly systemic problems, and to have one answer for one problem seems simple enough. That's great, but even if you pull that lever, you're going to make 17 balls over here fall. There's going to be unintended consequences and downstream effects that you can't anticipate. Sometimes we can, but most of the times we can't. And
Yeah.
so, too often, people are like, all right, if I can't solve it all, then why would I do anything? But
Right.
if you applied that same principle to your everyday life, you would be a horribly unhealthy person, right? Like, so this is all, and it always is kind of our own internal battle of like, we only get one vote. We only have 24 hours in a day. Where can I best use my energies? And there's a lot more we can do, even if you don't see the actual change that we want right now. Like we live in a Netflix generation. Like press play, I get it. We'll move on. That's not
Hmm.
how politics work. This is a coalition, messy type of business. And if you ain't building them, then someone else is more than willing to do it on your behalf.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. That would be true. So yeah, that's interesting. So a lot of like where we're at now, I think we could say fairly that where we're at now, like, a lot of this was produced by systems that have been in place for a long time. The idea I wrote today about Representative Pascrell's chapter. I
Yep.
might be saying his name wrong. It was funny that I wrote about that because I got some pushback in the comments from people that did not like Representative Pascal, and it's like, well,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
it happens. Not the point, was not my argument, but he, writes about how the primary system needs to be reformed because
Mhm.
and this what I wrote, it really puts it incentivizes our elected representatives and people that would be elected representatives to focus their efforts solely on appealing to, the people that are willing to participate in a partisan primary, or
Yep.
in Utah, in a closed caucus system, like,
Yep.
and basically just to do the vast majority of their work really representing a small segment of their constituents.
Mhm.
And getting out of that, Representative Pascal, he had a few suggestions, some of which are kind of those individual things, but it does seem like something where there is a systemic fix to that.
Mhm.
Like, whether it's a jungle primary or something else, like, what would you say to someone that thinks that the individual changes are downstream of systemic changes?
Yeah, they're both right, right? Like the arrows are pointing in both directions. And
Yeah.
so one of the if I could like sprinkle fairy dust on people out there and just understand this one thing, I would say that people that make you unbelievably upset when they feel like when it looks like they're doing the wrong thing, they're only responding to their incentives. Do they
Hmm.
wish it could be different? Often they will say in private closed door meetings, or mostly when they retire, they're going to say, yeah, I wish it were different. But when I'm in office, I'm appealing to the people who
Yeah.
I know will show up to vote. And then if you start thinking about it, like, should they have to try to take guesses on people who aren't even taking the time to actually show up and vote? Right. And that
Yeah.
can be a primary or that could be a general. But we've never historically had so few competitive elections, which, as
Right.
you mentioned, it means you're running to the right or you're running to the left, and you're acting as in office to preempt those challenges. I am more conservative than anyone that can take my place. I am more liberal than anyone that can take my place. And so this just creates an incentive structure where the performative nature really takes a back seat to the good faith legislating that they'll tell you they wish we're different, but they're only responding to the incentives at hand. So that is both our problem as only joining, mostly not showing up to vote in partisan primaries, if that's our only
Hmm.
option. And then B, there are absolutely an infinite number of systemic changes we can make to change that incentive structure legally. And this
Yeah.
is where state level work really matters. This is where local work really matters. To your first question, a lot of folks are saying, we can't change primary processes anyway, so I'm going to sit out entirely. And so that's even going to reduce that pool further
Right.
and further and further down, where you're ultimately getting like 7% of eligible voters deciding 90% of congressional seats. And then they're only going to work on behalf of those 7% because they know that they're the only ones who are going to show up next time anyway. So it just creates this cyclical nature where, yes, it's the systemic, but it's also the individual. And those, you can't separate the two, and never should we want to.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. And that also leads very neatly into an issue. Like, one thing that people talk a lot about, and I'm bringing this up because you wrote the chapter on it. People talk
Nice.
about people talk about term limits. Say, okay, so you've got all these congressmen that will tell you behind closed doors, like, listen, I know there's a better way to do this, and I wish I could do it that
Yep.
better way, but
Yep.
because I have to win re-election, I got to do what I got to do.
Yep.
Term limits are it's a sensical solution to that. You can see how, like X leads to Y. So why are term limits a bad idea?
It's one of the most popular ideas out there. So I have become
Yeah.
incredibly unpopular just by saying no. Your idea that everyone holds is not helpful. And here's why. I mean, this is a perfect extension of our last conversation. And we just said that if you replace a sitting member of Congress, more than likely, 90% more or likely, that the replacement's going to be more extreme than the first one, right?
Hmm.
Like, just look at Joe Manchin, right? He was from West Virginia. He was probably literally the only person that can be a Democrat from West Virginia anymore.
Hmm.
He retired. What happened? His
Right.
replacement is incredibly conservative, which makes sense from a ruby red state. Same
Yeah.
with Mitt Romney in Utah, probably
Hmm.
home familiar stance for you. So the fact is that if we don't have competitive elections anyway, then the person who's going to replace them are by definition going to be more extreme. So if you're trying to solve the partisanship problem, you're only going to make it worse the more often you turn over those seats. It's the one that have the established connections, have the established relationships that can give some sort of trust to their voters who can say, yeah, we can have a Democrat from West Virginia because we know him.
Yeah.
But the minute that person's gone, they're going to be replaced. So if you're trying to solve the partisanship problem, it's only going to speed it up. If you're going to try to solve like the less reliance on special interests, because that's another reason people say we need term limits, right? They're beholden to the special interest groups who keep them in power. If you don't know the job, just like if you go to a car mechanic, I don't know, Nick, if you're a car guy, but if you go to a car mechanic, you're going to be like, he's going to tell you what you need to fix, and you're not going to know the difference of whether to call BS or not.
Right.
That's what happens for members of Congress too, where they show up on the job, and on a Tuesday, you got to vote for healthcare. You got to vote for Ukraine aid. You got to vote for crypto subsidies. No one is qualified to be a member of Congress. So they do like what anybody else does when you don't know the answer. You probably Google it first, right? And if that doesn't work, then you go find someone you trust. And in DC, in politics, those are special interest groups. So it will make them more dependent on the people you're trying to lessen their dependence on. And then there's a whole host of other reasons that I go through in the book of like every single argument we get for term limits is just it's going to make the problem worse despite being such a common sense solution of Congress sucks, the people in Congress must suck. The only way we can get them out is by term limiting and by a constitutional amendment. It will just make all those problems worse until you get to the age limit thing, which is what most people bring up and seeing like Mitch McConnell freezing or Dianne Feinstein dying in office. The Senate average age is about 187, right? Like we see these things out. So then solve the problem you're trying to solve. If your age limit problem, if your age is a problem, then put age limits on, not term limits, which will necessarily group in all those young, popular, effective members of Congress who want to stay in this position and do good. And you're looping them in the same category, the same broad brush as you are the people freezing in front of camera. It's just a draconian measure that will do more harm than good.
Yeah, that's interesting. I will make one note on Mitt Romney's replacement, John Curtis. I think I want to note both for Utahns that like him and those that don't, that I think politically he's actually fairly close to Mitt. He's much less conservative than a lot of Utahns would like, and then obviously much less liberal than a lot of other.
Would he vote to impeach Trump?
Well, okay, so that would be he probably wouldn't do that. But he oh gosh, I'm forgetting.
Neither would Mitt Romney unless he were not running for re-election.
Yeah, the that's I mean that funny how that works. Okay, so let's take that idea, the one that so being in Congress is incredibly hard. It's an incredibly difficult job. You need to know. I mean, the range of issues on which you're expected to act and pretend to be an expert is, it's a very long list. And so because of that, and I interned with the state legislature here in Utah, and it was the same sort of deal where, you're voting on, there was one specific one where I think the vote was after lunch, and we had in some lobbyists at lunch to tell these Democrats what the Democratic policy should be on like mail order contacts. It's like there's nothing like in your like political philosophy that like
where really, do we stand on this?
Like there's no direct correlation between what you think about taxes and collectivism and anyway. And so that's the same thing. And you got the chapter in the book from I'm gonna get his name wrong. Let's see, from Quadricos.
Yep.
Quadricos. There we go. Quadricos Driscoll about lobbyists. And like so there are a lot of good points made. It's like lobbyists have this information that congressmen need, and the congresspeople. So you've worked on the Hill. How big are congressional staffs? Like how many people do they have? What does this look like mechanically? How many people are surrounding a congressperson?
Nice, getting into the nitty gritty. I love it. So I guess let's do it this way. Do you know the answer?
I don't.
Let's do it then. Let's go at House office. How many do you think they are allowed to have by law?
Allowed by law? Oh my gosh. I hope it's a high number, and I'm going to be, I'm going to say like 15.
18, not bad. 18 full-time staff, not bad, right? And when you tell folks that, you're like, all right, that's a good small business, right? Like in terms of HR and stuff like that. They should be able to make their lives work with 18. And I'm sympathetic to that argument until we start going, all right, half of them are in DC, half of them are in the district, automatically, 9 and 9, okay? The ones in the district are not doing any policy things. So the things that you already said of like what it takes to be a member of Congress, you can't be expert in. Half of them are gone, not helping you on that. They're doing
Okay.
constituent casework, they're doing events, they're helping people with Social Security, stuff like that. Okay, so we got 9 in DC. Everyone's got a chief to kind of do that, the manage the office while the member's doing the 180 things that a member has to do in a given day. You have a legislative director to kind of set the direction of what that member of Congress wants to do policy wise over their 2 years in their term. You have a communications director and then probably 2 more communications aides, one being like a reporter working with, a staffer working with reporters, working back home to make sure that their message gets out, newsletters. And then you have one, probably 2 doing digital stuff, given the rise of social media and how much they want
Yeah.
that messaging to come in. So there's 4 people. Then you got a staff assistant doing like a catch-all, driving the member around to all the things that they have to do, and a scheduler. That's 6. Okay, of the 9 we have left. What have we not mentioned yet?
Anyone doing any sort of research?
Anyone doing any sort of policy,
Any sort of
right?
policy? Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
so research about what's a good idea, turning that into legislative language, which no one knows how to do unless you've been there for a long time, right? So you're down to like 2,
Yeah.
sometimes 3 in an average office doing the actual policy stuff. And so
Yeah.
one of the biggest misnomers is that members of Congress are just like, if they're good at their job, they're heads down, the lamp is on late at night, and they are writing bills that they have just spent years and hours researching. That's not how it works. It's usually
Right.
dependent on you in the state legislature of being like, what's a good idea? I had this thought late at night, or I talked to this person, say we should do X, turn that into legislative language. And they're like, oh my God, I have no idea how to do this.
Yeah.
So we have 2 or 3 policy staffers doing all of this. And to be honest, they're 25 years old and
Right.
they make about $38,000 a year, which if you spent any time in DC, you're bunking up with about 5 of your friends and you are looking for a new job in the private sector immediately, which means
Yeah.
you got to start that process of onboarding them, learning the language. This is where a huge revolving door problems, where all of that institutional knowledge goes right out the door, either to go back home because politics sucks, or I want to go to a lobbying shop and I can make money actually knowing what I know. And
Yeah.
Congress as an institution and members themselves suffer because they don't have that expertise on staff.
So that's really interesting. Having spent some time on Wall Street, I can tell you that one, speaking as someone that was at a nice big law firm, junior associates when they first start out, certainly I'm very much including myself in this, they're just not that good. They're not
Yeah.
that useful, not that helpful. Like there might be people that can write reasonably well, that can do research reasonably well, they can, or they can review a contract and pick some things out that you tell them to look for. By and large, people aren't that great at that, but maybe good at that.
Yep.
They don't know anything.
Yep.
Like you learn everything on the job. Like, your law school classes, maybe you did well in property, whatever. It's like none of that is actually very relevant once you get on the job. And so, and the reason people stay and get good is because you make a lot more than $38,000 a year. So
Yeah.
people are like, yeah, I'll stay. And so
And in the future, your earnings potential is almost unlimited, right?
it's very, very high. Yeah, you know, if you make partner at one of those Wall Street firms, you're not a
Yep.
millionaire down the road, you're a millionaire immediately.
Yep.
And so these staffers, so you're saying that they're making 38 grand a year. That's not very, certainly. I mean, nowhere are you rich off that. And in DC, you're very much not. And then I would imagine there's not a whole ton of room for advancement. Like you stay in that position and then in 10 years, you're making 80 or 100,000 or something. Like you're kind of capped. So you're probably not staying there very long, as you alluded to. And so by the time you start to get good, you're looking to get out.
100%. Yeah, and
Okay.
and two big differences with your scenario. You had law school, which you said isn't very relevant to actually practicing law. There's something true there, but there is no school to be a congressional staffer. Like there's literally no
Yeah.
equivalent there. So you're taking political science. I went through an entire PhD program with a specialization in Congress, by the way, and I never knew how to write a bill. Like
Right.
that's a different
Yeah.
skill set. And you think like
Yeah.
I spent 48 years in school and still would show up as a very entry level staffer and have to rely on someone else who's been there and done that.
Yeah.
And so that's just it's a very, very different thing. And then the second thing is that that earnings potential. So not only are they capped in the number of positions that are available for advancement, but by law, they are capped at about 250 grand maximum salary, even if they're the best in the entire world at it. And lobbying sectors, I mean, It's not
Oh
unheard of to
yeah.
go make a mill. So why wouldn't
Yeah.
you go over there and have more freedom? You don't have half the country hate you because you automatically are working for a member who half the country hates.
Yep.
The hours are not that good because they vote to midnight, not irregularly, and there's
Hmm.
no work life balance. And so now we're talking. No wonder they're 25 years old. How can you raise a family in DC on any of those salaries, let alone try to show up for dinner at night? You just can't do it.
Right. And so it seems to me like an idealized situation because I and having spent a lot of time as a lawyer, I still don't love the idea of lobbyists, even if they provide this important service and they know this information because someone is paying them.
Hmm.
And especially with, I understand there are a lot of nonprofits that have lobbyists, someone's still paying those salaries. And then certainly with, uh, any big industry, big company, like they have a lot of lobbyists. And so, and I'd imagine they're very good
Hmm.
and they can spend a lot of money to get access to all these fancy lunches and dinners where they get to meet people.
Yep.
You spend
Yep.
$5,000, you get an hour with, or 5 minutes
Yep.
or however long
Yep.
with whoever. And so it seems like an ideal situation, and it's funny to say this while the Department of Government Efficiency is kind of doing the opposite of this,
Yep.
uh, intentionally, and Congress, I think Newt Gingrich comes up in the book as having
Yep.
reduced this before, but it seems like you'd want like a massive staff. I'd want keep all the people that you have now, and then add another 15 aides and make it so maybe you don't start out you're not going to start out at a super high salary, but you're higher than 38 and you can go reasonably high. It's a good enough job. You have enough people where you're not working till one all that often, and you're able to build a career of it, and you get really good at it on the I recognize that some people don't like people representing the government, but anyway, but
Yep.
you're making that money off taxpayers, not off a particular industry interest.
Yep.
Does anyone talk about that sort of stuff? Is there any appetite for that? What do you think about
There
that?
are, yeah, it is a small group that has that message, and they mostly preach to the choir. And I say that confidently because I'm in that
Dang.
choir, right? Like,
Yeah.
it is some of the worst politics. Going back to your term limits question, some of the worst politics to say, let's spend more money on Congress. It is the least
Right.
popular branch of government. And so to ask for any raise for that most unpopular branch is just the primary ads write themselves. And so there's kind of this mutually
Right.
assured destruction with members here, right? Of like, nope, can't do it. Members of Congress haven't had a pay raise, they don't even adjust for inflation since 2008, right? So this just
Right.
reduce because it's bad politics to make a pay raise on yourself.
Hmm.
And so this just reduces the pool of people who are interested in this. Either A, you can afford it,
Right.
and this is like a side job, and this is why you have a disproportionately wealthy lawyer or lawmaker class, or
Hmm.
you want to exist and you don't care about this money. You like the partisanship, right? That's what you're running for, and this is the arena you want to be in, or a combination of both, which is what we likely see. So these have huge consequences because you're right. Like this should be working in Congress, like walking through there, writing laws should be like one of the most sought after positions we have. Like in terms of
Hmm.
impact and ROI on like how you spend a day, we should
Hmm.
want people to be like civic duty committed to like we want the best and the
Yeah.
brightest competing with Google, competing with Meta, competing with Wall Street. Like we should want to do that. And just the incentive structure is not there. And I say that having followed that and having the bad bank account to prove it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it is. I think of, I think of my friends that have worked in Washington, and a lot of them that spent time as interns and as staffers. A lot of them came from money, where
Mm-hmm.
it's just, or it's, it's a college experience. You do it for a little
Yep.
bit and then you get out,
Yep.
and
Yep.
you're only getting so good if you're spending 3 months or a year or 3 years there.
Exactly. Yep.
That's really interesting. So, how did you curate like these particular myths? What was the like? Obviously, you've been getting these questions for a long time. That makes sense. Someone that's
Yep.
involved in politics and knows a lot of people that aren't. How did you land on these particular ones?
It's honestly one of the writing this, getting this out there was hard. But
Yeah.
this was actually the easiest part. Two easy parts that don't seem like they should be easy. One, that this list wrote itself. I mean,
Yeah.
just from if I just sat down and I did this of like, all right, give me 10 minutes to come up with the 13 things that I wish people would know. And
Hmm.
boom, those are our chapters. It like
Yeah.
came very, very, very easily. The second thing that was easy, that was surprising, is finding people to help me write them. Right, I had my targets of people of the type of person I wanted to see. I wanted a Republican here. I wanted this experience there, and every single one of them, when I broached it with them, said yes, which
No
is
kidding.
crazy. Every single one, which is crazy because I'm not offering any money. I mean, book sales may help
Yeah.
later on. I'm
Yeah.
sharing
Yeah.
it with them, right? And these people are not busy, right? Like these are
Hmm.
incredibly successful sitting members of Congress, chiefs of staff. Alyssa Farah Griffin's on the View every day. I like these. They all said yes. Like I'm tired of this garbage too. Like I
Hmm.
hear this on my very specific topic, and I went for them for that topic, and knowing that they deal with this day to day, and they're like, absolutely, give me a platform, let's do it. And so the topics and the contributors were what I thought would be the hardest, and it ended up being the easiest.
That's that's really interesting. That's good to hear. And that's kind of funny. It squares a little bit with with my experience starting, starting to write and then starting the podcast. I have been shy, like I can't offer people anything. I'm not giving them any money. You
Yeah,
were generous enough to come on. It's like I have a very small platform. Would love to have a large platform, because I'm trying
sure.
to do this full time, but currently have a
Yep.
very small platform. And by and large, it's certainly not everyone has said yes or made time or responded, but a lot have. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people that are much cooler than me and have much larger platforms than me, and it's funny. So one of my okay, so one note about the book, two things that we don't need to talk about this, but I was blown away, not blown away. I maybe it's what I would have guessed, but it's like, my gosh, just seeing it written out. Representative Kilmer's chapter where he's talking about his daily schedule. It's
Yeah.
like they don't have time to do anything. It's
Yep.
nuts. I was actually thinking it would might not be a terrible idea to have, one, maybe a lot more days in Washington, or two, a lot more members of Congress. That'd be
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
whole new different issue. But anyway, the yeah, they basically, it's like, why don't they have time to really sit down and read the bills? It's like, well,
Yeah.
like you just literally have no time to sit.
Tell me in this schedule where you would do that.
Yeah, you just can't
Yep.
can't ever sleep, ever.
Yep.
But I loved the chapter by Dr. Mason. I vote the issues, not the party,
Yep.
and I think it was that chapter. Let me see. I wrote
Yep.
down,
It was.
and there's some stuff in there about these empirical experiments they did where they give these different issues to Democrats and Republicans,
Mm-hmm.
and then whether they'll defend them or not depends entirely on what they're told about those issues, about those positions.
Yep.
And then the funny part of that is that they're not just defending the policies, defending the positions, they're defending them from principle.
Yep.
Like that. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. That to
Yeah.
me that's a big thing you want people to kind of internalize and be
100%. And
aware
this
of.
is one, yeah, and you probably heard this, tell me if you haven't, but like, I, no candidate, no party, I'm not beholden to any party. I hear the best ideas and I give my vote to who I want to support, who convinces me that they have the right stances,
Yeah.
that we treat ourselves as free agents, and every
Right.
2 or 4 years we're willing to go anywhere on the ballot. And it's a lie. It's an absolute lie where it's not. The causal direction is the exact opposite. That
Yeah.
we are we will motivate our reasoning to support the party we want rather than use the reasoning to tell us where our allegiances actually should lie based on the policy itself. And the worst, there's a lot of worse parts to that. So just knowing that, and everyone is subject to that, but partisans, the ones who are the ones saying this most often, the ones who say they're paying the most attention, the most civically engaged, are the least likely to hear new information and use it to update their beliefs. And then, even worse than that, they'll use this reasoning, change it a little bit, and then make it support for why they held that stance in the first place. And so, just depending on who's telling us what, we will update our beliefs in real time and convince ourselves, not even convince ourselves, know it to be true in our soul that we thought it all along. And this
Yeah.
is weaponized by partisans, by campaigns, by politicians. And we see this play out. I mean, just turn on the news. Like, Republicans are for tariffs now,
Right.
right? And they're supporting things by their doctrine, their full on canon of beliefs. What you know about Republicans, at least historically, is that they're free market, right?
Hmm.
Get government out of this stuff, and now they're twisting themselves in knots defending this. And the
Hmm.
same, you can do it for Democrats on certain issues and Republicans on others, where the causal direction is absolutely flipped, and we have convinced ourselves that it's other people who are just being led astray, that they're not
Yeah.
paying enough attention or they're not reading the right information, and that's why they vote the way they do. They're dumb. And
Yeah.
we should check ourselves in the mirror about when the last time we've been convinced by the other party to think something different. And I bet most of us would really struggle to do it.
Yeah. There's yeah, it's going to be really interesting over the next couple of years to see where Democrats come out on a lot of the social issues, on transgender people
Yep.
generally and in sports and all that.
Yep.
It's interesting looking back to see how that changed in the first place. And then it's going to be
Yep.
interesting to see where it
Yep.
goes from here. But I also think, 'cause there are obviously people that do start out with one party and then end up with another, and
Yep.
for one reason or another. But the phenomenon, it does seem, still holds to a great degree, where the the degree to which they embrace their new party, their new identity, is just as intense as the degree to which they embrace their past one.
Yep.
They're not really changing. They're not really changing much fundamentally about how they relate to information, how they relate to beliefs. They're just changing that set, that set of beliefs. They're changing,
Yep.
yeah,
And
ideological orientation.
they update it, everything else,
Yeah.
like the things that don't really, like, aren't their key issues. Everyone's got one, two, three key issues that are like no touchy. But then everything else that they haven't thought that much about, they'll just adopt the party line, and then more and more they'll start to believe those just as intensely
Hmm.
as their core beliefs. And so it's kind of like the loves of your life, right? Like, if you've had multiple, you can't ever imagine having a different one. But the minute that you do, you're like, man, this is great too. Like, I am committed to this person, even though I said the same exact things to someone else a couple of years ago. So it's not unlike that, because we believe this at a very, very emotional level, like an identity level. When we think it's all rational, we think it's all just us doing a pros and cons list, and whoever has more pros than cons gets our vote. It don't work like that.
That is super funny. Thinking now about the times. Yeah, very, very happily married
You don't
now.
have to admit everything right now, but
No,
yeah.
no, just thinking about the number of times I've said something along those, like, I will never recover from this.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Just
You're
like,
not alone.
yeah. So when you were doing this, what's the biggest thing that surprised you? And not just surprised you about the process, but surprised you, like, about these myths as you're looking into it further, or as you get drafts of chapters from contributors.
Hmm.
What's the biggest thing where it's like, I honestly, despite the fact that I'd think about this for a career, I didn't know that.
It's a good question, and answer I should have. But honestly, I have spent so much time with these things. Like, it was finally validating to see them come out
Yeah.
from practitioners' perspectives. Like, so I've been in around politics, and some of these I have felt or dealt with in just my everyday life. But a
Hmm.
lot of these, like, I've never been a member of Congress. So, like, to know their 5 minute chunks of a schedule, I knew it to be true theoretically, and even just by talking to friends who are them. But, like, for them to be exasperated and finally feel like they have an outlet to like hopefully get this to people, and have them update their belief so that Congress is not so easily hated, or that members of Congress are just not so easily vilified. That was just really good to see play out from people of like, yes, I knew all of these things theoretically, and I talked to my folks or my circle about them from my perspective, but it was true for them too in their everyday life. And it was cathartic for a lot of us to kind of be like, you really do feel okay, good, like that we're not crazy, and maybe we can do some good if people sit down in here with an open mind and say, like, um, can I read this and try to update even just two, three, four of these beliefs so I'm
Yeah.
not susceptible to these things going forward.
Yeah. And so here's a question. How do you, as the author and editor of this book, and as a professor at George Washington University, someone with a PhD in political science with experience on the Hill, how do you check your own biases?
I
How
don't
how
I don't need it. No, I'm
Okay.
just kidding. I'm just
Oh,
kidding.
good. Congratulations.
I absolutely need. I probably need it more than anyone. Like if I believe the data of like people who say that they're most involved in this stuff are the least likely to
Yeah,
update it.
right.
But so this has been a purposeful thing of mine, not only and probably in no small part because my wife is a mental health therapist. Right, like
Mm,
she comes through in this book a lot of just like some of the recommendations when we don't have a lot of change or we don't have a systemic answer to this. When we get down to the person or the personal day to day choices that we make, she was really really helpful in this. And so I really adopted a few mantras of kind of do as I say, not just what I or do as I do, not just what I say. And a
mhm,
lot of that is just focus on questions and not going to any conversation trying to convince people, right? Like including conversations like this, like to ask questions is such a good way to feel where people are coming from. And
mm,
too easily are we able to just group, all right, you don't believe what I want. It's a waste of time. You guys are dumb. You're misguided. We'll wait for you to realize the error of your ways. And then finally, when you realize you admit you're wrong, then we can have a conversation. Like that is
yeah.
just the exact opposite way to do that. And these people, even if they believe diametrically opposed views, like there are reasons they do, right?
Mhm,
And there's a lot of common humanity between all of us, and their path took them down to different answers. And to pretend like we all have the right answer key to it, honestly, a lot of this stuff is unsolvable, right?
mhm,
It may be for now, but in 10 years, think about how the world looked different 10 years ago and what it's going to look like now. Like the answers for then are not the answers for now. Um,
mhm,
and so just recognizing that and having a humility not only about historical perspectives, but even just humane perspectives of like this stuff can and should make you mad. That's fine, but it shouldn't reduce people's humanity to just what their party labels are. And so that's where I really tried to be purposeful, including within my classrooms of like I don't allow people to say she said. You
mhm,
have to know their name. Because
mm,
if you know their name, it's way different to disagree with someone if you're doing it personally than if you are. It's like going to dinner with someone, right? The minute you go to dinner and break bread with someone, you have a different relationship, even if you've never thought about it. You are very much less likely to attack their person, attack
mhm.
their personality, attack their family, or even just discount the fact that they're humans. And so to incorporate that in our everyday life, like bring the personable back into it, yeah, it can make a huge difference. And that's something I'm taking away from what I'm trying to incorporate in my everyday life.
That's a good answer. What are your classes like? How big are they? I would imagine my guess would be that GW is a fairly liberal university.
Mm-hmm.
What are the discussions like in your classroom?
These guys, so I teach masters only, which is
Okay.
both a blessing and a curse. The blessing is that these people are paying infinity dollars to be there. They're investing in it. They know they're not coming here to find themselves. They know they
Mm,
want to be there,
yeah.
and that's helpful in like preparation. They're reading. I don't have to chase them down to do assignments that much. Um, so that's good. The curse is that there's a self-selection of these folks. Like these are the ones who need it the least, right? It's like in any classroom, the ones that sit in the front of the class are the ones that are going to get A's anyway. You want the people in the back of the class to want to sit in the front. And so they're active. Like it's not a sage on the stage, throw a PowerPoint up, click through, this is what you need to know. See you guys next time. It is a back and forth. Why do you think that? Explain your reasoning. Be able to convince someone else. What are your preconceived notions? There's a lot of defense going on where you're just getting checked all of the time, and not by me only, but by their classmates because they recognize like this is a safe space to do this stuff. Where
Mhm.
the minute you go in, and a lot of my students have entry level jobs where they're not afforded that type of freedom. They're faking it till they make it, right? And
Yeah.
so they have respected this, and I've hopefully created a culture where they're coming into the classroom of like, man, do I have to think this way even though because my boss thinks this way? Or where are the lines of freedom here where I don't want to just end up down 10 years down the line and I've never thought about these things that I pretend to think very, very deeply about. So hopefully it's an open space where people come in and a lot of assumptions are challenged and we end up in a better spot even if we don't find the answer.
Yeah. How has teaching changed your view or changed your approach to convincing someone of something?
It's I'm more hopeful after every time I leave a class of just
Mm,
like these kids are motivated, rotated, they're pissed in the exact right way, right? Like they're even in my short tenure as a professor, like I've seen a shift away from government as like it's just a bunch of old white dudes deciding for people. I don't have my say, impact. Like, I'm going to go do nonprofit work because at least there I can have a tangible impact. And I've
Hmm.
already seen a shift back into, like, if I want to create the systemic change that I want, so not just my program or not just this year or not just this population, like if I want to change people's lives, government's got to be involved. Whether you love it or hate it, government has to be involved. It's the best way to make big change. And they're kind of seeing like, all right, to change the game, I got to know the game. And to
Hmm.
do that, I need to either go work on the Hill for 10 years and hopefully get a good job with a good member who has some influence, or I can kind of take advantage of the higher education to train me so that I don't have to start on at home plate. I can maybe start on first or maybe even
Hmm.
second. And
Yeah.
so I leave those classes more hopeful in just that these people are the most kind, the most tolerant, the most open minded, people, even though they get a bad rap, just like every other young generation ever has, of being lazy and entitled and all of that. I don't get that.
Hmm.
And so it's changed my perspective on just being hopeful at a time where, I mean, no matter what you believe, I think there's a lot of pessimism going around.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good answer. I like to end interviews by asking what people are, what gives people hope, and I will end with that in just a couple minutes. What? Oh gosh, dang it! By mentioning that, I forgot the question I was going to ask. No, okay, I got it back. So here we are. Very interesting time in politics. Obviously we are close to 2 months into the Trump administration 2.0. Uh, he hit the ground running in many respects.
Yep.
Certainly went in with with more of a plan than for his first administration, and with more of kind of his ideologically aligned people around him.
Yep.
What and and feel free to answer this however you would like. Whether as a political science scientist, or as a professor, or as Casey Burgat, private voter.
Hmm.
Uh, what is something from the last month and 2/3 that maybe that you would disagree with politically or agree with, but like you understand where they're going, you would have done it differently? And what's something you actually are kind of like, I like that. I'm okay with that.
I think that the government has for too long gone without an audit of itself. Right? Like, it is a government's huge. I mean, there's no denying it. I mean, you can argue programmatically or even department wide that they're necessary things,
Hmm.
but the government didn't know how much it was spending on certain things, or at least all of the government didn't. And even worse, the people writing the checks didn't know what was going where. They gave a lot of that discretion for a lot of reasons we don't have time to talk about. They gave that power to the bureaucrats to do
Hmm.
it, and for too long, it has gone unchecked. And so I would have done it incredibly differently. But that Department of Government Efficiency was something that it is a shakeup that has been needed for a long, long time. And I don't blame a president for taking advantage of that power. I don't even blame him for using Elon
Hmm.
to some degree. Um, what I do, I blame Congress, right? Like,
Hmm.
the power comes with responsibility, and they unquestionably have the power of the purse, but they've forfeited for too long that responsibility of making sure they know where those dollars are going, and even more, if those dollars are going to effective purposes. They just have gone
Hmm.
too long, and they got caught.
Yeah, that's a good answer. What is there anything from the last month and 2/3 where you're like, that's actually like, I'm glad they did it, and I would have done it in a reasonably similar way.
Mm.
Often those aren't the ones that you think about, so that might
Yeah.
be a hard question to answer.
Um,
'Cause that doesn't make the news. That's boring.
yeah, I guess I don't have one. Right? Like, we're just hurtling towards shutdowns. A lot of the process stuff is
Yeah.
is broken, and we see in that play out. Everything's done by executive order, with love them or hate them. I think it's a bad way to legislate
Mhm.
um, across presidencies and parties. So, and Congress just simply hasn't passed many laws. So maybe,
Mhm.
I don't know. I haven't
Yeah.
seen one that I disagree with the process. A lot of times I disagree with the politics, and so there's not a huge overlap in those circles of good job, keep going.
Yeah. That's a fair answer. So let me end, in keeping with our goal to keep this to a tightish 45ish.
Yep.
Uh, let me end with that final question. What gives you hope?
I think it's really important. We're incredibly myopic people, right?
Mhm.
That we see the world through our lens. We are really bad at having a empathy outside of our own circle, and I think history really helps with that. right? That if you know history, if you know the trends, not only within the United States but across the world, like if you have seen things play out before, the alarmist sense doesn't the alarm bells don't ring as loud as for people who don't know the difference. And the
Yeah.
hard part, though, with that is that sometimes the alarm bells should be ringing really loud, and it should shock you in a way that, like, we can't continue to go down this path. And so what gives me hope is like knowing how many tough political times we've been through before. I mean, literally a civil war where we're fight brother against brother, 600,000 dead. Watergate, the distrust in our institutions when Congress was just as unpopular, the Supreme Court too, had assassination attempts. Like if you want to look at like the early 1800s when we were hanging by a thread as a nation, or the civil rights 1960s where people are getting assassinated left, right, and center, like on a lot of markers we're more healthy than those times. But it doesn't guarantee success, right? Like this is what I really struggle with a lot of the time is like, just because it's really unlikely doesn't mean it's impossible. And when we're talking about like democratic backsliding or failed democracies, you don't get those back. You don't get another swing at the plate to say like, shoot, we went too far. And so getting people to say, well, it didn't fail before in his first term, why is it going to be any different now? Or you've been saying that this has been a constitutional crisis for 8 years now. You're just a boy who cried wolf. And I was like, yeah, like the same to me is like drunk driving, right? You can get away with it 99% of the time, but the minute you hit someone, it's catastrophic. It's life-changing. It can't be coming back. And so just from knowing this stuff institutionally and the history of like these are how a lot of democracies have failed throughout history. A lot of these same alarm bells are ringing. Even if you love the president, it really matters how they do things. And just the intra-branch conflicts that we have right now where people aren't respecting the oath to their institution. It's only so far as they agree with the president or disagree with the president in office now. That's just a bad sign. So looking at history is giving me both hope and struggles sometimes. So that's a half answer to your hopeful question, but not everything's
not everything's sunny all the time. And that is a fair answer. Yeah. Well, Dr. Casey Burgat, I really appreciate it. I loved the book. Hope everyone goes out and buys it and reads it. And I think like it's fair to acknowledge, and I said this in the article today, like most of these people are coming at this from the left or the center. Like these are not like, people coming out of the pages of the American Conservative or whatnot.
Yep.
But the arguments are the arguments, and you can still engage with the arguments and then say, you know what, I disagree or I agree, or whatever. We have to, I think, get more used to engaging with arguments that come from our ideological opponents.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting? I know you're trying to keep it tight, but what's interesting is that there's not many MAGA conservatives in this book.
Yeah.
It's not for lack of asking them. They said no, but what's interesting is I've got several emails and texts from people in that world, like fully committed in that world, saying, good job. This is important. I wish I could say it, which goes to that bipartisan and it's dead chapter of like, I fear the primary. I can't be known saying this stuff, but I'm very, very glad this stuff is out there. I wish I were in a position to be able to add my name to it, which has been both validating and pisses me off at the exact same time.
Oh man, someday. And that, that speaks to, it speaks to a lot of what we're going through right now.
Exactly.
That is true. Well, thank you very much. And hopefully sales skyrocket after.
Nice. From your lips to God's ear, Nick. Thank you, man. I appreciate the time.
All right. And that was the interview. Thank you very much for listening. If you wouldn't mind, please do leave a review for the podcast. I believe those are important. And subscribe to the newsletter, which will be linked in the show notes or can be found at neverclosetheinquiry.substack.com. Thanks.